Hello and welcome to Dialogue Across the Stream. I'm Michael Rauch with Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Ain, and Rabbi Herman. And today we're going to start off with the idea of doubt, which is a central part of Judaism, but also seems to be something that has less value these days in the world in terms of not really allowing room for nuance in conversation, in arguments, in debates. And so it also seems like a good place to start in terms of the different denominations of Judaism. And the idea of if the definition of doubt is different in each denomination. And so I think as a person, or as the person who's not a rabbi, I'll start with a more layperson notion of what I imagine modern Orthodoxy to be, which is a more literal definition of the Torah, a more literal reading of the Torah, as opposed to reform, which seems to allow for more adaptation, and I'm assuming conservatism, somewhere in the middle. And to see if each denomination has a different sense of what doubt is. And so, Rabbi Herman, I'd love to start with you and just to talk about how you see doubt as a rabbi and as a modern Orthodox.
Sure. So hello, everyone, again. It's a pleasure to be back. Again, I'm Rabbi Jason Herman at the Hudson Yards Synagogue, and it's always a pleasure to be with my two esteemed colleagues, both Rabbi Hirsch and Rabbi Ain, and just love doing this. So to come to the question, I think you did frame it, somewhat correctly, that orthodoxy, I would just say orthodoxy writ large, certainly takes a more literal view of the Torah. But I don't think the Torah itself precludes doubt. I think there you actually have a divide within orthodoxy. The Haredi, it's sometimes called ultra-Orthodox community to our right, has sort of not tolerated doubt in many of their institutions, frowns on questioning and asking certain questions. But I think a lot of that's more of a sociological fear than a religious ideology. But you see doubt certainly throughout the Torah and without rabbinic literature. Avram, the founder of Judaism, begins with doubt. He asks God, "B'me'edah, how do I know that what you're promising me is true?" Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, our great teacher, is full of doubt at lots of times. He asks, God, how could, you send me, you people haven't listened to me. And then it, goes through every time the people complain, he's falling on his face, wondering, is he actually accomplishing what he's meant to accomplish? And the rabbis, fill a Talmud of over 2,000, close to 3,000 pages, debating and arguing with a certain amount of, uncertainty. So doubt is always present, and certainly this notion that we tolerate doubt, we allow you to just, not be certain, ask questions, I think is just a very Jewish idea and is very much present. I think what maybe distinguishes orthodoxy, but not entirely, I'm sure that in certain realms, and I'll let my conservative reform colleagues speak for themselves, is that we say, despite your doubts, whatever doubts you have, actions remain obligatory. That we want you to still act as if these things were true, even if you doubt them. And the reason for that is that because if you were just to suddenly shift everything aside because you had doubts, then you might never remember them, and there might never come a time where you could actually answer your questions. I think, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, once said about prayer, he says, he prays even when he doesn't have kavanah, the right intention or thoughts about praying, because it's while he's praying, they might come. And if he were to be just not pray because he didn't feel it, then he might never pray. So the same idea is that with our actions and living a Jewish lifestyle, you might come to different answers, you might come to different beliefs, but if you don't do anything because you're doubting, then it'll never happen.
And if I were to come to you, if I was a member of your congregation and I said, I'm not sure that God exists, I'm not sure I believe in God, what would be your response to me as a Orthodox rabbi?
So I think it would be a longer conversation, but I would start with the fact is Judaism doesn't ask you to believe in God. Judaism asks you to love God, which is a very actually interesting, different thing. We don't actually ever say, in any of our davening, in any of the Torah, does it actually have a command, you must believe in God. We say, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. So what does it mean to love God? And then you can ask the question, what does it mean to love God if you don't believe in God. That's a very different notion. We could, explore that. But there's no obligation to actually believe in God.
I'll ask you a question back to you. What does it mean to love God if you don't believe in God?
Right. So, there I would actually say that the Hebrew word ahav, to love, comes from hav, to give. And the notion of actually to love God is to try and accomplish what God's will is and to give to God and figure out ways you can give to God, which is also means of giving to the world. And we can explore different notions about what that might mean and, how one can give and how one can fulfill a will of an entity you perhaps don't believe in, but maybe we have to talk about what it is you don't believe in. I think it might have been the Kutzker Rebbe, I don't know if we're 100% sure, who once said that the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either.
Okay. Rabbi Ain, do you want to pick up a similar question for
Sure. Well, there was a lot there. I'm going to start with the end, which is, I get this all the time. I'm not sure I believe in God. And my answer is Judaism believes in God. Not all Jews believe in God. But that doesn't make you any less part of the Jewish people. Being part of the Jewish people has many components, but Judaism believes in God. I'm willing to take Rabbi Herman's challenge that it's not about belief, it's about love, but I don't know that you can love something that you don't believe in as a foundational assumption. So I do believe that Judaism believes in the existence of God. What that God is and how that God exists in the world, that's where doubt comes in. And that's where there isn't certainty. Our prayers themselves, our Torah itself reflects God in so many different ways. Just last week, when I was preparing for Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Commemoration Day, I read an incredible article by Dr. Yedida Kanfer, a Jewish historian, who talked about the El Malei Rachamim, the traditional memorial prayer. And we say in that prayer that the souls of those departed go under Kanfei Shechina, the wings of God, and it's the feminine attribute of God that embraces the souls of people in comfort. And we can have a discussion about different genders and how different genders behave in the world. But the fact that in our liturgy of memory, we pick up on one aspect of God as opposed to the fire and brimstone aspect of God, to me shows doubt and nuance that we need to embrace. I absolutely believe there is doubt, but I think that it's what Rabbi Herman was saying, that there's two different issues. There can be truth and doubt with regard to what does the Torah say and how did the Torah come into being. But then there's also doubt within the Torah itself. So where you take as an assumption or as a foundation that the Torah exists, and we don't start questioning how or why or when. You just say, this is a corpus of literature that is sacred and means something. And then you put yourself within that corpus of literature and you see doubt as Rabbi Herman said, with Abraham, with Sarah, with Moshe. We see it over and over again. And even the rabbis have doubts on why things happen. Nothing is taken fully as fact. So I think struggling with the question of who we are is a very Jewish question.
Rabbi Hirsch, you want to?
Well, as my colleagues were talking, I was thinking of that old joke about religious agnostic and atheist Jews. The religious Jew says, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. The agnostic Jew says, Shema Yisrael, I don't know Eloheinu, I don't know Echad. And the atheist Jew says, Shema Yisrael, I deny Eloheinu, I deny Echad. As long as they all come to synagogue and they say the Shema, it's fine. It really is fine, because we of course had many, many firm beliefs, some of which form the foundation of not only Christianity and Islam, but Western society itself. But we defined ourselves first and foremost. We acquired Jewish status by virtue of our membership in the Jewish people. And there's no religious litmus test to that. Most of us become Jews at birth, and the rest of us join the Jewish family through a process that establishes that you have no contradictory beliefs to Judaism, but the rabbis expressly say, teach something, but if they really want to join the Jewish family, embrace people who want to join the Jewish family and have an open perspective. Not all rabbis of our tradition said that, but I think it's fair to say that the mainstream of classic rabbinic tradition felt that. So I would just add to what my colleagues say. I agree with what they said. We've developed a bad reputation in modern society with respect to religious people. I do not believe that most religious people give off the impression of the kind of certainty that extremists do, or more fervently pious people might. But in fact, religion is not about certainty. Science is about certainty. In principle, if you take the physical sciences, if you have the same input and you can control all the various factors, you should get the same result every single time. That's science. That's not religion. Religion asks the hardest human questions. And because we ask the hardest human questions, we're not likely to find all of the answers, at least all of the answers that are satisfactory to us, which is why the same questions are addressed over and over again for thousands of years. And people ask the same questions in every generation. We ask, in science, they ask, how was I born? In religion, we ask, what is man that you have regard for us? Or as Jeremiah put it, why did I come out of this womb? Science deals with the search for certainty. Religion deals with the search for the soul. And if we are to, Rabbi Herman mentioned Abraham. Abraham's journey started on the journey with the first step. He even asked, where am I going? And God said, I'll tell you when you get there. Go to a land that I will show you. So this notion that has become more intense in modern society, that religion demands certainty, is, first of all, it's a distortion of religion. And secondly, it actually casts religion, it compromises our reputation. Religion is not about the search for certainty. Religion is about the search for meaning. And that's what gives significance to the religious enterprise, even in modern times, even in what is sometimes called the post-religious period or the scientific era, because we are far from answering all the basic questions of science, let alone of humanity. More religion in the world would be better, but more religion of the uncertain kind, the kind that asks the right questions and not necessarily imposes the most literal-minded answers.
There was a story you told that I'll remind you of and let you tell it, but I believe it was about Rabbi Hillel and Shammai and an argument they had over 2 or 3 years. And if you want to just talk about that, because I remember just how educational, but also how resonant it felt in terms of what we should be doing more of in the world today, in America today. And so please take it.
Well, I think they had many disputations, dozens, I think maybe hundreds of disputations in the Talmud. And they disagreed on lots of things. But I think the thing you're talking about is there's a passage in the Talmud how the schools of Hillel and Shammai debated for 2.5 years about whether it was better if man had never been created at all. And they went back and forth and they debated back and forth. And finally, they concluded it would have been better if man had not been created. But given that he was created, let him make the most of it. That is such a classically Jewish response. I think it was W.H. Auden who said his favorite example of Jewish humor was when the rabbi asks, "Wouldn't it been better had we not been born at all? But how many people have such good luck? Not 1 out of 10." So really, the essence of the Jewish enterprise is, given that we were born, how do we make the most of the human condition?
If I might just add something, to this, coming back also to the original question, we have this notion of, ikarim, which literally are the essential principles of faith. Although for most of Jewish history, we didn't really focus on them, and only until you get to Maimonides, late into the 12th century, did he write down his 13 principles of faith. What are essentials? So actually, Rabbi Hirsch just said something that actually makes me think about how I think about the Ikarim and principles of faith, and what I often do say to congregants, not necessarily always in response to the question, I don't believe in God. But I don't usually focus on the Rambam's 13. I actually give what is a modern adaptation to Rabbi Yosef Albo's 3 Ikarim in the Sefer Ikarim, which is the Book of Principles. And he has just 3 principles of faith, which I give a slight modern adaptation to. The first is that I believe that there's a creator who created the world. What I adapt that to mean, because you can think about whatever that means to be created, what is created, how the world came into being, is that I think what's fundamental, and this is Rabbi Hirsch's words, what's fundamental, I think, to the Jewish enterprise is that the world doesn't exist by accident. And by extension, you don't exist by accident. That it means you believe that we're here for a reason. That's what it means to believe that there's a creator, because the creator has to put that will in, we're here for a reason. The second is that God revealed a Torah, which that means that it means within Judaism, the answer to why am I here, why do I exist, can be found in the Torah. Could be interpreted in different ways to answer that question. Could be lots of different teachings that get you there. But it means I can be able in some way through a bunch of exercise and work, answer the question, why am I here, through an exploration of Torah. And we can have a large expansive definition as to what Torah is, including various rabbinic teachings, a person's own Torah putting in. But within Jewish teaching and Jewish tradition and Torah, I can begin to answer the question, why am I here? And the third, Alba writes, is a notion of reward and punishment, but I would actually say that God is still watching, there's a consequence. That am I fulfilling the reasons for being here isn't something that's just ignored and haphazard, but it actually makes a difference. And I think if you believe those 3 things, then Judaism has something to say to you, and there's a value to the enterprise. And that's what, just to repeat, is that I'm here for a reason. I'm not here by accident. That reason can be found through a process of exploration, whatever it is in the Torah, and then ultimately what I do has consequence.
And just to follow on that, by consequence, can you give some example of?
That it doesn't mean that whatever you think about God, it doesn't mean like God just doesn't care. That God cares about what I do. Exactly what that means, probably a million different interpretations, whether it's a literal, you do X, Y, and Z, there's going to be reward. And if you don't, there's some punishment, or, some different notion of that, God can communicate, even through our own conscience, pleasure or displeasure. But it just means that however we understand God, that God cares about what we do, that it actually matters to God.
I wanted to kind of connect that to, and you started talking a little bit about it, but basically after life, after our time on this earth, what you believe, what you're raised to believe happens to us, and where that fits in Judaism. So
this I'm actually teaching a class on this right now, and I think that this is one of those questions where if people are certain with you on this answer, then you need to say, I don't know anybody that's gone and come back to tell us exactly what it's like. So there is nothing that is more uncertain than what happens after you die. And in Judaism, we see a real evolution of thought. Certainly in the Bible, there was a sense that we die, our body stops working, and that's it. I mean, in the 5 books. And then there becomes an expansion in the time of the prophets and beyond, that there begins to be a sense of life after death. We want to call it a soul. We want to call it Olam Haba, the world to come. Certainly the notion of the world to come we see in rabbinic literature. My feeling is that there's 2 ways also of looking at the Messianic era. So there's the Messianic era in the classic political sense, that things are going to get really bad, but before things get better. And then where are we going to all end up? Is it going to be Jerusalem? We're not sure. But I also think the Messianic era is that we have an opportunity at some point to really be reconnected with our loved ones. Personally, I take tremendous strength in the thought that when I die, what that means is, yes, my body will stop working. Yes, that means I will be buried completely in a casket in a cemetery. But I'd also like to believe that my soul will continue to live, that it will be reunited with those that I love that have gone before me, and that my life will continue to have value and meaning based on the way people live their lives. I mean, the notion of Mechayeh HaMetim, that God redeems or revives the dead, gives life to the dead. I think we see that in when people are named after those who pass on. When we, in my family, my grandparents are buried way out on Long Island, right near JFK, and the planes are always over the flight pattern. The cemetery is below the flight path. And when we would go out and we'd see a plane go over, we'd sort of wave to our family. Now, does that feel simplistic, non-scientific? Sure. But it's extraordinarily comforting, which I don't mind sharing with people, that it's something that I hold on to.
Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Ain had mentioned that part of Messianic belief is that when things get really awful, they'll then get better. And I know I'm asking you a question that a point you brought up, but of course it made me think of the Holocaust and thinking about how much worse could it get for things to get better. And I'm just wondering, in this discussion of faith, doubt, how to fit an idea like that into what happened in Europe in World War II.
Well, yeah, again, you're asking one of those questions that don't really have satisfactory answers. The question of why bad things happen to good people, and vice versa too, has been raised from the outset. It's raised in the Bible. And there have been, of course, there have been answers that have been proposed in Jewish tradition, a whole series of answers from there was actually a basic evil inherent in the situation, which you didn't see, to the real reward is in the afterlife. And so it kind of doesn't really matter so much what happens in this world, to just a whole range of other proposed answers, none of which are really fully satisfying. And so we are left with questions and faith. By the way, that's why religion is sometimes referred to as a faith and not as knowledge, because we believe. Judaism is philosophy based on hope, but it's a hope that acknowledges that there is evil inherent in the world, natural evils, human evils, and that the human task and the Jewish task is to battle with evil and to overcome it through, among other ways, human action. And so the question of, by the way, it's not only with respect to the Holocaust, it can be on any individual case as well. Why did the baby die after 3 days, 3 days after their birth. What people often express to me that their understanding of Judaism is that Judaism doesn't believe in the afterlife. It's because we have so transmitted Judaism's emphasis on this world that somehow or another, in some people in modern times, that has come to them as a sort of expectation that Judaism doesn't believe in the world to come, which is not true. It never was true. But it is true that Judaism places central emphasis on this world, and that the Jewish task is slowly, generation after generation, with optimism and hope in the human condition that in fact we can overcome, to pursue justice and to bring the world to a state of harmony. And that state of harmony is actually defined in Judaism as the Messianic Era. And I just say the final point, in the Mashiach, the Messiah in Judaism, was never really interpreted as in the manner that most Christians understand Messiah and Messianic Era as some kind of divine coming. It simply meant a person of flesh and blood, a human person who would find the way politically and sociologically to unite all humanity and to bring about a world of peace. And that's what we believe in. And that then explains why Judaism put so much emphasis on this world, on human action, what Rabbi Herman was talking about before, on doing the deeds, even if you're not sure about the belief itself. And underlying that is a really inspirational, fundamental assumption of hope in the human condition, that we can, in fact, overcome all this evil in the world.
The central idea of repair the world seems to capture the notion of what you're talking about the now, the here, using hope and the power that we have to help the lives of other people as a way to help our own lives. I wanted to just kind of slowly move from this idea of doubt in Judaism to the very unfortunately relevant topic of cancel culture now, and finding a parallel with what feels like the opposite of doubt, and the ideas of that certain people have a monopoly on truth or a monopoly on power, or if you do something wrong, there's not the idea to have an available way to redeem yourself, that nuance is lost, that the complication of life is lost, that the idea of making mistakes and learning from them and being able to look at things with not an open mind fully, not a closed mind fully, but confusion and certain uncertainty, and ask questions. And so where as rabbis, you see cancel culture as a outgrowth of something going on in our religious lives in the country, or if you think it's a completely separate idea of being able to give room and freedom for people to have doubt, to make mistakes, to ask questions that may lead them down the wrong path, and then be able to find the right path. And Rabbi Hirsch, I don't know if you want to start.
Sure. First of all, human relations are not possible without the ability to forgive, to make mistakes, and to seek forgiveness, and to ask for forgiveness, and to give forgiveness. It's just people can't have a relationship in the absence of that, because every human being is fallible and every human being makes mistakes of omission and commission. In fact, we feel so strongly about that we have an entire season. It's the holiest season of the year in Judaism that's devoted specifically to that concept of repentance. And we have specific expectations of how to do repentance, how to ask for repentance of God and of fellow human beings, and how to give repentance, and under what circumstances to give repentance, and what's the process of making amends. So to the extent that in some way our society today is more judgmental in that regard, and therefore offers less opportunities for people to make mistakes. I mean, after all, I don't know if you remember, if my colleagues remember that case just a few weeks ago about the editor of Teen Vogue, whose past Twitter comments when she was in high school undermined and eventually prevented her from becoming the editor. People, they need to be able to, and social media then keeps all of our mistakes from birth until death permanent, in a permanent record, which makes repentance and apologizing and asking for forgiveness and accepting forgiveness much more difficult. But people need to be able to acknowledge mistakes and start again. And we feel so strongly about that these are the highest of the high holy days in Judaism. To the extent that our culture seems to block some of that, it's very bad. It's very bad because it renders human relationships much more difficult and, in fact, impossible. I would add one more thing. I could talk about this for hours, of course, but I would add just one more element to this. There is a perception that much of the cancel culture today in our country is coming from the left. It's a perception that I obviously share. I'm very concerned about that. It's not liberalism. It's something else. But it's not liberalism, which believes in free exchange of ideas. But it's not restricted to the left. I myself have been canceled many times by ultra-Orthodox colleagues who have not even been willing to share a platform because of their perception that what I represent constitutes something that needs to be canceled. One final example, the elections in Israel that just transpired produced for the first time a Reform rabbi, member of Knesset, and immediately, even before the Knesset convened, immediately all of the ultra-Orthodox Knesset members announced that they were not going to pray with this Reform rabbi and they were not going to interact with this Reform rabbi. So while it is true that there is a lot of cancel culture in the secular left, it's not restricted to the secular left.
And Rabbi Ain, unfortunately, one of the consequences of this type of existence, especially on social media and Twitter, as Rabbi Hirsch mentioned, is that it creates fear for people to stand up for what they believe, to say things that they fear may get them canceled, and to actually be able to debate ideas, getting back to the idea of doubt, and to be honest about what you believe and what you don't believe in. And I'm just curious about your thoughts about that, and how one can manage that type of fear to stand up for what they believe and what they think, given what the consequence may be.
Well, look, like many of us, we can probably argue components of both sides of this. There are always consequences to our behaviors. And if there is attitudes we hold that are reprehensible and we choose to share them, it is our right to share them, but there might be consequences to what it means to share them. That's different to me than having a conversation where we're struggling with ideas and talking them out. I think that's one of the problems with social media, that everything is done in sound bites. Like I have 2 teenage boys and we've taught them since they were little, screenshots last forever. Screenshots last forever. I mean, I swear that is more of a mantra in our house than probably, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, because they know they need to love their neighbor, but screenshots last forever. And that we are really careful about that with understanding social media. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't engage in complicated conversations. We should have them. I think the issue with so much of this is it about canceling, or is it about holding people accountable? And is it about giving people the space that they should take to ask for forgiveness. I think the challenge is what one person will call cancel culture, another person will call accountability. And I understand there's a fine line between the two, but that's the line that I think we need to get in that messy area. I struggle with this. I don't know that I see it as the same as what Rabbi Hirsch said about the ultra-Orthodox canceling either he or I. I think that that's just human decency, that it's not because of something I said, it's actually because of who I am and how I exist. It's nothing I did. It's a much bigger issue. They don't want to be near me because of the totality of who I am, as opposed to somebody saying something on Twitter or somebody saying something in high school or at a fraternity or sorority party. None of those things that I'm excusing, but it's different than pure existence. I think we have to learn how to talk to each other.
And Rabbi Herman, the idea of what Rabbi Ain was talking about in terms of canceling someone just because of who they are and who they exist versus an opinion they may share on social media. But in both situations, where do you see the absence of a voice speaking up in defense that feels loud enough and strong enough to bring reason to this what feels like a binary situation that is going on across America right now? Right.
So I agree with both of my colleagues, but I might part a little bit with Rabbi Ain and the very last statement she made. And let me say, I agree with her certainly in the sense that there really is accountability. And you know what? There are times that we should be, quote unquote, canceling people, even for things they said. And I'll give you examples, Rabbi Hirsch's comment, both from the right and from the left, that have happened recently. So I believe it was one of the University of California campuses just in the last year during the pandemic, had a Zoom panel with Rasmia Oda, who is an admitted terrorist. And, in that time, being this admitted terrorist, there was a large push from the right to have that event canceled. She's never been repentant. She's never expressed remorse for the terrorist attack that she participated in. And the event was canceled, actually not by the university, but by Zoom. Zoom actually would not actually allow their corporate technology to be used to carry the event. And actually Zoom actually canceled it. On the flip side, let's just take a different example. We had two examples in Congress. Former Representative Steve King from Iowa, who has made a long history of racist comments, was stripped by actually his Republican colleagues at the time of all committee assignments. And then more recently was done to Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene because of actual real hateful comments that were inexcusable. And those canceling can happen. And I don't think that we necessarily should think that that's a problem. There's got to be accountability, and sometimes even accountability for what you said. We protect free speech, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily get rewarded, and doesn't mean we need to give you a platform for it. But on the also same side, maybe in terms of what you fundamentally believe, okay, maybe someone fundamentally believes something hateful, but even it doesn't have to be hateful. There are reasons we wouldn't necessarily include somebody. We're three rabbis representing three different denominations. Yet for purposes of most of these discussions and discussions like it, you wouldn't see a Messianic rabbi included because we're trying to represent something that we see as in a very broad spectrum, but not a unlimited spectrum. That doesn't mean as a person we might meet a Messianic rabbi and have a great conversation and want to learn more about how they see the world, but there are things we're not going to include them in, and it doesn't make sense for us to. But there is a flip side to this. And the story from the Gemara I usually like to tell is actually the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan, who took in Reish Lakish, who had previously been abandoned as a student, and trained him, and he became a leading speaker and leader and rabbi of his time. And they disagreed a lot, despite it being a rabbi mentor-mentee relationship. But when Reish Lakish, who actually died first, Reish Lakish died, Rabbi Yochanan was distraught. And they brought another student to learn with him. And the student would basically just be a yes man and always agree with Rabbi Yochanan. And that made Rabbi Yochanan more distraught. Rabbi Yochanan says, why can't you be like Reish Lakish? When I had an argument with Reish Lakish, he would give me 49 different reasons why I was wrong. And actually, each one of those reasons sharpened my own thinking. It's actually when someone agrees with you, you don't learn, you don't expand, you don't have greater insight. You need a bit of argument, a bit of disagreement in order to expand your understanding of something. And the real question, I think, that may be missing in a lot of American society, in this, both on the liberal and conservative end, is not is our intellectual circles and the people we speak to unlimited, where we tolerate everybody, but is it just broad enough that we're actually learning and growing? And here I would actually feel that, on the one hand, should be cancel culture and their consequences, but I would sometimes say that it sometimes feels like our intellectual worlds are not broad enough and that we could be growing more.
I agree, but I think there's the third category that we haven't approached, which is actually the distinction between people's ideas and people's bad behaviors. So when people's ideas get canceled because of their behaviors, do we not include Shlomo Carlebach's music in liturgy because of his behavior? The question of whether to cancel or not cancel him has nothing to do with his tunes. People love his tunes. That's not the issue. The question of should we be using Wagner at a Jewish wedding because Hitler liked Wagner and was he an anti-Semite? That is nothing about the it's not about that. It's about what the person represents. If somebody is an adulterer, if somebody is a harasser and an abuser, it's actually not about their ideas. It's about the essence of who they are. And what does it mean to include ideas with somebody that we might find abhorrent? And I think that is another level of the challenge that we are dealing with today and that we have not fully solved. And your examples of King and Taylor Greene were one. I thought you were going to bring up Al Franken. That when the left, so to speak, canceled Al Franken, it wasn't because of his ideas. It was the concern about his behavior from before he was in Congress. And so how do we struggle with that? And can we separate the person and their message? And I actually am not sure. I think it depends. But I think that's one of the challenges that we're going through as well. And it comes to have people engaged in acts of tshuva. And if they haven't, and the opportunity has been given, then we wonder, do their ideas have a space in the public marketplace of ideas?
We'll just add one final comment. I know we have to finish. Just from my perspective, that's absolutely right. Both of what you said, I completely agree with. There are certain ideas that go beyond the threshold. We should not be expected to tolerate racists, anti-Semites, murderers and ideas beyond the pale. We should not. That said, a free society and a liberal society has to be able to tolerate as much free space and clash of ideas, and even aggressive and emotional clash of ideas as it possibly can. And if the balance is out of whack, then we begin to lose something fundamental in the essence of a free and liberal society. And what that is, of course, is a matter of judgment. That's why it's hard.
Right.
Okay. It's a perfect place to stop. Thank you, Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Ain, Rabbi Herman, and everyone who's watching. Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you all. Look forward.